2, 1, and go.
Hey folks, welcome to our Saturday Night Live in support of our Purple Heart Project. Topic tonight is, can somebody read it for me?
Veneers?
Yeah, was there a subtitle?
Making and
Using and making veneers.
Using and making. Okay, well let's dive right in and we'll do the introductions as time passes. How many people we have on?
137.
137 people that were on time. More than I can say for myself. I've got an injured wing, so I can't do too much, but I can talk and show you some stuff. Give me a question, please.
First question comes from your daughter, Loren. What is a veneer? No, I'm just kidding. Well, she did ask that, but...
She did?
Answer it.
Loren. So this is a piece of cherry, and I actually don't know at what thickness it's considered veneer. But instead of keeping it in its 3/4 inch piece like that, I sliced it into pieces of veneer. Maybe somebody could look that up and see if there's a actual definition for when a piece of solid wood becomes a veneer. Now most people think of veneer as what they make plywood out of. So this is Baltic birch. That means that the wood is birch and it has multiple layers. So it would be like taking a piece of this and then taking another piece and gluing it that way, and the next piece gluing it that way. So they're alternating grain direction. Makes for a more stable piece of wood. Typically used because you want to be able to use the really pretty stuff, I would say carefully. So if you want a 3/4 inch piece of bird's eye maple, instead of a solid 3/4 inch, and you think of how much bird's eye is in there that'll never be seen, you take a thin slice of the bird's eye and you glue it onto a piece of solid maple, and now you have bird's eye maple. So Exhibit A, if you look at the stretchers on my bench, they're maple, but then I took bird's eye and I glued a piece on here and I glued a piece on here, and these pieces were about 1/8 of an inch thick, so that's why I'm curious to see if somebody actually has a comment on or a stat on what constitutes veneer. And then I glued a cap on, so if you look really closely you can see a glue line right here. Blends in nicely in some areas. If you looked underneath here, there isn't a piece because I didn't need it. You're not going to see it. And I used veneer all the way around it. Now there's a couple of other examples that I'll show you as we go. Next question.
All right. Question comes from...
And howdy, Loren. Keep up the good work.
Question comes from Tom in Colchester, England.
Hey, Tom.
He says, when making your own veneers, how thick can they be before you need to worry about wood movement?
Oh, you know, that's a mystery and a half. Because if you look at this piece of Baltic birch, it technically breaks all the rules, right? It's cross-grain construction. It's 20 inches wide. So right underneath this layer, you've got a piece of wood that's running this way, which means this piece wants to expand and contract this way, stable in this direction. The piece underneath it wants to expand and contract this way, stable in this direction, and then on and on. So I don't know whether there's a point. Obviously, there's a point where the strength of the glue outstrips the ability for the wood to move, but I almost can't believe that. So I don't know the answer to that, where it becomes, but well, let me show you this. I made the doors for this are right here. I got one left to do. So this is some what we would call ribbon stripe mahogany, and you can see how thick it is. It's on a piece of MDF, and the MDF's not going to move, and it's going to be banded with a bird's eye maple band all the way around. Speaking of which, Jake, did I ever cut the splines in that? Yeah, I did. So that's been on there for how long? 2 years? 3 years? And it has not moved. There's not been any glue failure anywhere. I glued these pieces, but I also ran a spline in there too. So I don't know. I have yet to find the answer to that question. At what point does the veneer break the bond because of its thickness? I've worked with 1/8 inch, I've worked with 16th inch, and I've used it in that form in veneering, and I haven't had a problem. So whether or not you can stretch it out to 1/4, I don't know. Wood is a mystery. Next, Frick.
All right, next one comes from Gary Cooper, and he says, what is the best wood to use as a base for veneer, or does it matter?
Well, so Alan Peters really liked using plywood. I like using MDF. The only problem with plywood, if you take, I mean, Baltic birch is supposedly a better grade of plywood. And if you were to mic it, meaning take a micrometer and check the thickness of it, you would gain, how much would you vary?
30?
30
Well, no.
on a piece of 1 inch?
Oh, 1 inch? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit. Whereas MDF tends to be a much tighter tolerance. So when I did that door, and I think MDF is a more stable product. Of course, it has its weaknesses too, right? You certainly can't use it anywhere where there's high moisture. But in this case, because it's, and whenever you veneer something, you really need to band both sides, veneer both sides, to even out the stress. But I would be much more confident that that's going to stay nice and flat with an MDF core as opposed to a plywood core. And if you pick up, we got anything around here? We use a lot of Baltic birch, and rarely can you get a piece that size. I don't have any right here at my fingertips. Rarely can you get a piece that size that would actually lay flat. It just doesn't. So I like MDF as a core. But yeah, I never want to see that core either. And there's while I'm talking about that, there's 2 different ways of doing it. I did this one because Jake can come in close and see. So this is an MDF, piece of maple MDF, and it has a piece of bird's eye maple on the edge. And I took the same piece of bird's eye and I just kept cutting strips off it, so they're all the same. So in this case, I have the solid wood sitting on top, so the joint is back here. On this one, I have, you know, if you looked underneath there, you'd see the edge of the MDF right here, and then this piece is glued on. But I did that for a reason, because of the play on mahogany and bird's eye. Sometimes, have we got an example here? I grabbed as many as I could. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the piece of MDF. I'm just trying to, nothing up there? Mm-mm. I'll take the piece of plywood. Here's an example. And if this was going to be cherry, I would glue a strip of cherry, maybe 1/4 inch, possibly 1/2 inch, depending on how much you're going to cut into it. And I would glue that all the way around first. Then I would sandwich the veneer like so. So you'd end up having, your glue joint would be out here in the edge, but you'd be looking at solid wood. And that works well if you're doing something like we did on the, we have a visitor? What's up, Mick? We're filming. You going over to see Dad? Give you an example. Okay, so when we cut in for this handle in the door, as long as you had solid wood, the band was wide enough, you could cut in there and it wouldn't be a problem. Obviously, I typically don't make the bands that big. So you can do either or. Add the band after or add the band before and then veneer it. And it's not really a strength issue, it's more of an application issue. Next one, Frick.
All right, next one comes from Barry O'Mahony in Bend, Oregon.
Hey, Barry.
He says, how important is it to balance a panel by putting veneer on both sides? Does it make a difference if one veneer is paper backed and one is raw, or whether the panel is MDF or plywood?
Read it again, please.
How important is it to balance a panel by putting veneer on both sides? Does it make a difference if one veneer is paper-backed and one is raw, or whether the panel is MDF or plywood?
So we were kind of talking about that. Now, he said some of the really thin veneers you can get, they actually apply it to a piece of paper just to make it a little bit easier to handle and it stays together. So if you look up here, up on top, I brought this home from BYU in 1989. So I had a lot more than that because they weren't doing anything with it. So that is all sheets of, there's cherry, there's maple, there's walnut, there's mahogany veneer. And that stuff is sliced rather thick by today's standards. If you want a stable panel, and I'll show you some exceptions to the rule. If you want a stable panel, we come back over to this again. I don't want that door to move. And remember, a glue line is going to be a stress line. So if there's only glue line on one side, it's going to cause uneven stress at some point, and I wouldn't expect this to be able to stay flat. So if I want that to be flat, and obviously you don't want your door to start to curl, then you have to balance it on both sides, meaning veneer on both sides. Now, there's an exception to that. If you're building a drawer, so this drawer, I had some really, really pretty walnut veneer. It was thin, and I didn't have a ton of it, but I had a flitch. So a flitch is when you take, this is a flitch. This was one piece of wood, and it was cut and kept in order. So each piece is the piece that came right behind the next one. So if you want to go in and do something decorative, you can. So if you look at this piece, see how that's exactly the same as that? And if you were to project it up onto here, that's the same piece. So what I did on this one, this has a solid wood, this is a walnut drawer front. But what I did, I don't know if you can you see it right there? Mm-hmm. So I veneered the front and I veneered the top. Didn't veneer the bottom. And I didn't veneer the inside. But I have a dovetail on both sides. That's going to keep that from moving. So in that application, I didn't have to worry about it. But if you're going to have a freestanding door, and I wouldn't do if I had a table and I was veneering it, the top for a table, I would put veneer on both sides of that as well. It's always going to be your best bet. It means extra work, but you get a more stable product. Next one, Frick. Oh, and as far as the paperback stuff, I don't even know if I've ever worked with the paperback veneer, but I can't imagine it being too much different. I think the safest thing, if you're using it in an application where it can't go wrong, then I would use the same product on both sides. Okay, Frick.
They want to know how you hurt your arm. Was it hockey?
I went to bed. I slept on it Monday night. That's a nice hat, Mick. Monday night, I had my arm underneath my pillow. And I woke up Tuesday, and yesterday I could not lift it. I couldn't do anything with it. I was in pain all day. And I went to see Lydia, who is our resident acupuncturist. She darn near killed me this morning. But I've got mobility there now that I haven't had for the last couple of days, so. I hope that's not a sign of getting old, is it, Moose?
It doesn't get any better.
Doesn't get any better, thank you. Next, Frick.
All right, next one comes from Kent in Southampton, Ontario.
Hey, Kent.
He says, when applying veneer to an edge, what method do you suggest to use on plywood or MDF cord woods?
When you're applying veneer on the edge.
To an edge.
To an edge.
What method do you suggest to use on plywood or MDF cord woods?
So I don't like to do that. I think it's really the chintzy way of doing it, but you can buy veneer that has a hot melt glue already on it, and they'll go in and they'll cover, they would do it like this. They would take, if this was a piece of mahogany plywood, they would take thin mahogany and they would iron it on and go all the way around. And I just think, you know what, the first time, the corners, the edges are always most susceptible. So I always like to have a little more than just veneer on there. I'd like to have at least 1/4 of an inch thick band, whether it's tucked underneath the veneer or whether it's applied on top of the veneer either way. But I don't like to use thin veneer on the edge. I suppose if it was something that was hanging on the wall, it wouldn't matter. But if it's going to be in a high traffic area, whether it's a drawer front or a door, I think you're far better off going with at least it would be called a lipping, a 1/4 inch lipping, and I would almost always apply it to the veneer first. Pardon me, I think you're asking a different question, but I would always apply it to the substrate, which is the plywood or the MDF first, and then put your veneer on the outside so it sandwiches it all together. You're talking about if you took a plywood door and you just wanted to band it, then in that case, the downside is you're going to see that 1/4 inch trim all the way around, but so what? You're not fooling anybody. They know it's veneer. I would do that before I would use just thin veneer glued on. That's my take. Next one, Frick.
Next one comes from Kent Moore in Renfrew, Ontario.
Hey, Kent. A lot of Ontario.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on using contact cement / glue for veneers?
No. So I don't know this for a fact, but Dale told me, Dale Nish, that the contact cement that's available in the industry is a whole lot better than the contact cement that we buy at a hardware store. And I have never seen contact cement as a great solution. There was a time when house builders would also be the ones that build their kitchens, and they would put Formica or some other plastic laminate on top of plywood, and it would be laid on there with contact cement, and it sooner or later seems to give up. So I'm not a fan of contact cement at all. I'm not a fan of hot melt glue for that application. I think your PVAs or aliphatic resins, which is your white glue and your yellow glue, are the best solution. I mean, if you're going to do it right. Do it right the first time. You never have to apologize for it, and chances are you're never going to have to fix it. Next, Frick.
Jerry Gillette in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania.
Hey, Jerry.
What is the thickest shop-made veneer, i.e. resawn on a bandsaw from solid stock, that you would recommend using? Is 1/8 inch too thick?
No, 1/8 inch. This stuff is, that's 1/8 inch. The only problem with doing it on a bandsaw, especially if you're getting any width, unless your bandsaw blade is freshly new, because most people don't sharpen the bandsaw blades, and you've got to make sure that your fence is tracking with the blade so that as you cut, the cut is parallel to the fence, which means sometimes you actually have to adjust the fence to do that. If you go much thinner than 1/8 of an inch and your blade wanders off or it hits a knot or just anything, you can lose your veneer. So sometimes even better to use your table saw. You know, you can cut 3 inches deep from both sides. So you would make a pass over the table saw blade, flip it around, and make another pass, and then go to your bandsaw and just remove that strip in the middle, which is a lot easier. And you didn't ask, but there's lots of carbide. I don't see them much anymore. Maybe they're there. I'm just not aware of it. But a lot of companies will make a carbide Resaw blade for cutting veneer, and I've had a couple of those, and they're unbelievably expensive, and I have never had them work as promised. Whereas a regular bandsaw blade, that's how that stuff was all cut out. By way of introduction, so how many people do we have on Frick?
489.
How many?
494.
500 people?
Just about.
So this is our bi-monthly.
Frick.
What?
Switch cameras.
Over here?
Yeah.
Tell me when it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't see a light yet.
There's no
light.
more light.
Oh, there's no light anymore?
You didn't pay attention to it.
So I didn't pay attention. So we do this every second Saturday night, and the purpose is to, I was going to say raise funds, but actually the purpose is to allow the general population to be able to participate in our Purple Heart Project. So we're excited because we are about to run our first class. Now we did squeeze in one class last August, but because of the situation, we lost all of our classes for 2020 and they were full. We planned extra classes for 2021. We lost all of those, except for the one we were able to squeeze in an all-Canadian class in August because The border was still closed. So we had to cancel the April class because we didn't get clarification that we were going to be able to do it until it was too late to arrange everybody's flights. So in May, what's the date in May, Jake?
I'll look it up.
Third week of May. We are having, I wonder if Luther sent me the our first Purple Heart project class, and I'm going to tell you what it is. Just let me, oh, he must not have been able to find it. Luther was going to.
16 to 21.
So that's May 16 to 21. I was going to have Luther give me the list so I could read to you the names of the guys that are coming. So class goes like this. It's a 6-day class, up from, we used to teach 5. We start at 7 in the morning, and over there is our classroom. It's a rink right now, but it'll convert back into a classroom. We have 14 students. 7 of them are combat wounded veterans that come as our guests and on our dime. And 7 are civilians who, but for the most part, want to come and be a part of it. It's awesome experience. I can't really put it into words. So first, the vets. The stipulation is, or the criteria is that you have to be someone who has been wounded, whether it's physically or mentally, in a combat role in a war zone. And we have lots of them. So you apply online, and we go through and we do the selection process very much like triage in a hospital. We try to take the people that we deem as being the most in need. So the 7 vets come in, we cover their airfare, we cover their hotel, we cover their meals, we feed all our meals here actually. We've got a first-class dining hall on the other side of that wall. Every combat wounded vet goes home with somewhere between $400 and $4,500 worth of premium tools. And when I say premium tools, it's all the same brand that I use. Exact same planes, saws, chisels, stones, measuring and marking tools. Plus, thanks to the bench brigade headed up by Jack Lane and his able assistant Chris Chahusky, every vet gets a bench that has been made by a civilian volunteer, made to our specs, and delivered to their home. And that was the final piece of the puzzle that we only put together a year and a half or so ago. So it's expensive to do, but who cares? And a lot of people want to participate. And if you're in Southern California, you can't very well make cookies for the guys in Grand Bay, New Brunswick. But if you want to, you can participate from a monetary standpoint, and that goes towards covering all of those expenses that I mentioned. So if you do the math, we do 42 vets each year and run it all out. You can see it's a pretty sizable sum, but we've been blessed to be able to raise the money to do it. We don't take a salary for this. We volunteer our time. And it's great. It's awesome. Just mention it quickly. So the 7 civilian spots, the class was originally, I started this class in 2000. It was called Training the Hand. And I had been asked by Sheridan College in Oakville, Ontario, if I would be interested in coming and teaching a week-long hand tool workshop that they were running. However, they wanted me to put the curriculum together, so we did. And the idea was that you would introduce people that are interested but not very knowledgeable in hand tools, and we would go in and learn to freehand sharpen. We would go in and learn how to operate a hand plane to the point where you can eliminate sandpaper. We learned to take rough lumber and dimension it so that it is flat, smooth, and square on all 6 surfaces. No power tools. You learn to cut dovetails, both through dovetails and half-blind dovetails, and sometimes even mitered edge, or houndstooth, mortise and tenon, through wedge tenon, and we often actually make a little. We make a little candle box. All the parts all done by hand. So civilians are a huge part of this. I'm learning this as I go, but they help create this environment that becomes a very healing environment for these wounded veterans, and it is an awesome experience that I can't really describe. I'm gonna introduce you to some of these guys that I've been working with as we go through the night, but I'll go back to answering a few questions. Go ahead, Frick.
Tyler Burke in California says, have you ever ebonized veneer? If so, what is your process?
Have I ever ebonized veneer? No, I have not. I have not ebonized veneer. I have made some ebony veneer, but I have not ebonized. And I expect you were doing that with maple or poplar or something. But no, sorry, haven't done that. Next, Chris. Next one, Frick.
Mike Evans in Tennessee. I have some
Hey, Mike.
old veneer that is brittle. Is there anything I can do to make it more workable?
Well, if it's already cracked or broken, there's not a whole lot you can do. However, if you can get the joints together nicely, you can actually use veneer tape. I don't know if I still have the veneer tape or not. I had some.
I think you do.
No, I don't know where it is because it's not in here. Somewhere I have some veneer tape. Someone sent it to me. And
Actually, it was Bill Bailey.
it's just a really thin tape that you lick and stick, and you can piece it all back together. You only have to have one good side, right? Because the other side is going to be glued onto your substrate. If typically what happens is it dries out. So if you take if you get yourself one of the world's
Greatest.
world's greatest
Spritzer bottle.
spritzer bottle, and you spritz water on there on the whole surface, and let it soak in, and just raise the moisture content a little bit. You can also do that to flatten it out. So what we would do if we had veneer, a lot of times if you're using veneer that is burl or any figured wood, as it dries, it gets really ripply, and if you use it like that and try to glue it to your substrate, as soon as you put pressure on there, it's going to split. So what we would do is we would wet it and then put it between two pieces of paper towel and just let the weight of the woods, something sitting on there. But eventually, as the moisture in the wood increases, it'll allow it to flatten out. The two pieces of paper towel will absorb some of that moisture, and now you can put it under some pressure, and when you take it out, it's nice and flat again, and now it's ready to be used on whatever project you're doing.
Immediately, right?
Immediately, yeah. It'll go back to being... You just got to make sure that you get it wet enough that it's pliable, and it will actually bend and lay flat. If you put pressure too soon, you'll split it. Am I talking here or there?
Main
Well, I'm
camera.
still looking over there.
Jake's.
Okay, I just want to read you who's coming to our class. What?
Luther said he's not sure if
He
they
said,
want
he
their
said
names.
it's in your email.
I got it right here.
Yeah, he said he's not sure if they want their names.
Well, I'll just use first names I'll use first names for everybody. So Jack from Texas. What Jack
May or
do
may
we...
not be from Cibolo?
How many Jacks do we know in Texas that we talk about quite often? Well, we'll have to go down a certain lane and decide that. Eric from California, who I know. Bill from North Carolina. Oh, Ken. Ken from Kansas. Dean from Alaska. Matthew from New Brunswick. Do I know him? And Alex from Ontario. So we have two Canadians. And then for vets, I won't say their names either, but we have Scott from Tennessee. We have Jerry from California. We have Wade from Nebraska. We have Carlos from Texas. Phil from North Carolina. Mike from Alberta. Freddie from Alberta. Wow, we have two Canadians. That'll be awesome. Great class. And we'll introduce you to them when they're actually here, but it's fun. Wow. And we'll film live a couple of times, as many times as we can, kind of give you the feel for what's going on. It's great. Okay, Frick, next question.
Larry Deason, in Louisville, Kentucky.
Hey, Larry.
To get a better grip on plywood edges, could you size the veneer with glue and then apply glue to edge?
So the whole thing about sizing is where you take some glue and you thin it with some water, and you spread it on. You brush it on to the edge like that, and wipe it off, let it dry, and it theoretically will help prevent the end grain from sucking all that glue in. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. I've sized stuff before, and I've not sized stuff before, and I can't tell you I've ever had a failure either way. So might be something we want to, actually probably a good YouTube video sometime to do. Now that I explained that, but read the question again, please, Frick.
To get a better grip on plywood edges, could you size the veneer with glue and then apply glue to edge?
Yeah. You know what? That's the old school way of doing it. Whether or not it actually works or improves it, I wouldn't say one way or the other. And as I mentioned, I've done it both ways, and I've never had the failure. So, but you got to make sure you put enough glue on there, particularly on MDF, because it'll suck it in pretty good. So be generous with your glue. And your best glue spreader is your finger, and you just use your finger right with your bottle in front of your finger, and just try to get it all in one nice even pass, and it just makes it so much easier and simpler and neater. Next one, Frick.
Next one comes from Todd Michael in Leaksdale.
Todd or Claude?
Todd.
Todd in Leaksdale?
Leaksdale.
Know what state?
Doesn't say. What's the best way to fix a bubble under veneer if it does not glue down properly?
Yeah. What did we do that on? Oh, the standing desk.
Multiple times.
Yeah. So we can't take them over and show our new veneer press, can we?
Yeah. Too far.
So what he's talking about, when you get into a large surface, remind me to talk about this stuff too. When you get into a large surface, you're putting on, this is when I would, if I was laying veneer on something this size, I would probably use a two-part adhesive that gives you half hour, 45 minutes of open time. If you're trying to use regular glue, by the time you get that spread all the way over there, there's going to be some areas that have started to dry out. And then if you don't get your clamping pressure even throughout, which is the downside to a physical clamping pressure and the upside to a vacuum press. So what happened, we were doing the standing desk, and we had veneered the top because we wanted it to be a nice big wide. I had some really wide cherry veneer. That was a 1/16 of an inch thick, beautiful stuff. But when you went and you tapped your finger, you could hear those places where it was hollow sounding, and I thought, oh, great. So what did we do?
Didn't you go in and cut it? Yeah.
Yeah. So what I did in that time, I took a really sharp X-Acto knife, one like that. That's a Tajima. And I went in, and I think I actually slid it on an angle, as opposed to if you were to cut like this, you're going to create a you're going to create a little bit of a V on both sides. So we went in and we slid it on an angle like that to open it up, and then squirt some glue in there. You can buy little little bottles that have a little thin needle, but somehow get some glue in there and then reclamp it and save it. But yeah, having to deal, that's one of the downsides to working with veneer. So the way to avoid it, instead of how to fix it, is to make sure that you have a generous amount of glue, but not too much. You don't want a puddle to end up in there. Get a nice, I often use a 32nd tooth trowel to spread the glue. It's the easiest and the fastest way. You can also use a roller. Harold does veneers up all our tops for our benches, and he uses a roller. Either way, you have to have a nice even coat, and it's got to be wet when you put the veneer down. So you may need to look into finding some of this two-part, it was boat glue that I used to use. You mix it up, and it would give you lots of time to get that nice even coat over there. So when you laid that down, it made contact everywhere. And you need to have a good press. Little small pieces aren't hard. Something this size, no problem at all to put a piece of wood on there and clamp it in 3 places. But when you're starting to do a big wide surface and you can't reach all the way, then it gets difficult. So Chris, I didn't call Chris. Chris Davenport, who works for RPC, that helps us tremendously. Chris built us a 4-foot by 8-foot vacuum press. I wish I could take you over there, but the wireless won't go that far. Anyway, so it's hinged in the back, and you lift it up, and you put whatever you need in there, and then when you bring the top down, and it's got 20 mil plastic, and it clamps on 3 or 4 spots, and you turn on the vacuum pump, and it draws 24 millimeters, or what is it? How is it measured? Whatever. And it works great. Works great. Now, I have made, I can't count how many of those I made over the years, but I could only ever get, the thickest vapor barrier that you could find, which means you would just use it until it got full of holes, and I'd hot melt glue the holes until finally I threw it out. But it's not hard to do. And I took my first one, actually the only other one I ever used, I just took an old compressor out of a freezer, and a compressor sucks in one end and blows in the other, and I would stick the hose on the sucking end, and I would just leave it running, and it would hold the vacuum in there. And anytime, never had a problem doing it that way. Only times I've ever had problems veneering is when you're using clamping pressure, and you put a bunch of cauls on there, and then you start putting your clamps on, and it's just not the easiest way to do it. Next, Frick.
Okay, next one comes from the chat from Pioneer Acres.
Pioneer Acres.
Yeah, that's their YouTube name.
Oh, yeah?
Can you use multiple pieces of veneer on one big surface, or should you always use a piece that fits just right?
Should you use multiple pieces of veneer on one big surface?
Or should you always use a piece that fits just right?
Well, the way I would do it is I would join the pieces of veneer with tape. So you make one big sheet out of as many sheets as you need, as opposed to trying to, there's something called hammering, I can't remember what it's called, but the way they do it and they overlap it, I've never done that, don't really like the results. So I would always make my panel up if I had several pieces. And that's not easy, trying to glue veneer together. And I've done lots of, I forgot them, but I've done lots of projects over the years. Little moosey, big moosey. You want to get a shot of them both sleeping? Little moose is sleeping, big moose is sleeping. I've done a lot of...
You put the standing desk together in 2 pieces.
Yeah, but 2 pieces were glued together before we put it down.
No, they weren't.
Yeah, they were, Jake. There's no way that I glued down one piece and then glued on a second piece.
You glued down one piece, the wider of the 2, and then the second one you glued down, and we pulled it against the other one. We did.
Don't believe you. Sorry. Don't believe you. I would always glue it up. So what I used to do is get 2 long, I had them hanging here for a long time, 2 long pieces of MDF, and you would squeeze the edge, you would take the 2 pieces of veneer, and you would squeeze them together so there was just a 1/4 inch so sticking out, and then you would use your plane like a big long shooting board, and you would plane until you had those 2 edges just right, and then you would lay them on a flat surface and use tape. I've used masking tape, which isn't that great because once you put pressure on masking tape, it's terrible to try to get off. But you would tape across the joint as many times as you need to, and then a long strip down the middle to hold it together, and then glue it down. You don't have to glue them together. The tape will hold it, and when it goes onto the substrate, you've got glue on both sides. It's not going to come apart. Next, Rick.
Next one comes from Mark Robson in Detroit, Michigan. He says,
Hey, Mark.
I know you don't need a vacuum bag, but do you have or use one to veneer?
Well,
Never.
we just answered that question. They're easy to make. If you need one for a particular project, go to your hardware store and get some, I think 6 mils, what the thickest you can get. 6 mil vapor barrier, and you just got to make a bag out of it. So you got to seal it. And the biggest problem is, and the reason we had one made, when we do these tables up, we want them to be flat within 0.010 of an inch over the length. So we want to be able to pull these down onto a flat reference surface. So that's the reason we did that. But if you're just making one, as long as you had something good and solid that you could then put your piece on. Now your piece of MDF, typically what I would use, you've got to run a whole bunch of little slots in on the table saw both ways, so it'll allow the air to get pulled out all the way around. But it's easy. And then, like I said, I got an old compressor. I didn't pay anything for it, out of a refrigerator. and just hook the hose up. You just have to let it keep running, because if you stop, it'll let go. The air will come back in. But you let it run for an hour or so, and when it's done, it works great. And you can also do shapes. If you're veneering around a shape, you can do that. It's pretty amazing how atmospheric pressure works, and I don't know much about it to explain it, but it is very interesting. I wanted to show you some of the stuff we got in the mail this week. So Kevin Windsor sent me this piece of Koso. Never heard of it. It's heavy. Did you look and see? We didn't find it on the chart?
I didn't find it on the chart, but it is CITES Appendix 2.
It is?
So
Meaning it has to be...
as restricted as Cocobolo.
Really? How did you know that?
I looked it up.
Because when you smuggled it across the border?
Did what?
Actually, no, he mailed it to us, didn't he?
Yes, it came directly here. He smuggled it.
So we'll make some saw handles out of that. Thank you, Kevin. And Frankie down in Long Island sent me 2 big, massive chunks of Purple Heart that are all nicely purpled up. I'm actually going to share one of these with Kevin Burris, and I'll tell you about Kevin after. Now, Jason Green came by the other day, and he made this. It's called kind of a Lazy Susan. So it's got really nice hardware on the bottom, so you would set it on your table, and then you can easily pass stuff around. Now, this process is called, read it, 1-inch thick birch, 17 inches in diameter, and the process is known as Lichtenberg wood burning or fractal image burning. And they do it by using high voltage electricity. So I thought he told me something about they use baking soda and water maybe. And it goes on there, and you put the 2 electrodes on, and when you see it go, it's like watching somebody weld. And that's what these little trees are. It's accomplished by using high voltage electricity, which creates amazing and incredibly detailed figures resembling lightning. This one has been epoxied using first a copper and then a gold green colored pigment down into the areas, and then 3 coats of polyurethane. And he says, be careful when you're doing it, don't electrocute yourself. So we'll give that away tonight in our draw. And I'll highlight a couple. So I work with 4 combat wounded vets and helping them get their business started. So I got this in the mail this week. So this is Jeff O'Connor. Jeff is in Virginia. Jeff retired the end of December, and he retired as an EOD. That stands for Explosive Ordnance Disposal, a Navy EOD. And Jeff's been making these for a long time. This is Cocobolo. This is called an Irish kiss stick. This is how Jeff will keep Super Dave and Jake in line when he's here assisting. But it's really nice. It's got the classic Canadian hockey tape grip. And I thought he does a really nice job on his logo. I think that's laser engraved in, I'm sure. And then he's got one on the bottom. And that's a nice piece of Cocobolo, and that's got some serious weight to it. And if you got kissed with that, you might have to go see your dentist or your mortician. Jeff was also a Chicago area policeman for 10 years before after 9/11, he joined EOD. And his son has just announced that he's going to follow in his father's footsteps. Then there's Kevin Burris. So Kevin makes these. Kevin is also EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Army, and he worked with Special Forces. Kevin spent 22 years, got blown up multiple times. When I say multiple, I mean over 100. The last one darn near killed him. But a lot of therapy and a lot of family support. He survived and been rehabilitated. So Kevin does these. This is granite. So this is laser engraved on granite. So this is Mount Suribachi. And that is in Okinawa. And there's my bag of Okinawa sand that somebody so generously sent to me. Tell me his name, Jake. It's right here.
No, it's not cryo. It's
right here. Jason Cryle. Yeah. Jason sent that to me. Now we're gonna give away one of Jeff's. Are we giving away a kiss stick?
No.
No? We're giving. Jeff also does the shave bowls. This one is Pacific U, and this is probably my favorite product we've had because my son Bo gives me the hot towel treatment and shaves, and I've got one made out of bog oak. So this is out of Pacific U, and this is badger hair. And what was I just going to say? Oh, so let me finish off Kevin, then I'll come back over to Bob. So Kevin did this one for me. So this is a renowned Canadian Navy ship. This is the landing at Omaha Beach, and I've got some Omaha sand that...
No,
I've got...
Utah, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Utah.
That's Omaha, this is Utah Beach. So that came to me. So what we'll do with you, if you get lucky enough to get one of Kevin's... Now that was granite, these ones are both in slate. And that's laser engraved on there, and it comes with a nice stand. And you can go on Kevin's website, and you can pick whichever one you want. He's done several of them. So you get to choose. And this is Bob Abbott. Bob is U.S. Air Force Intelligence. Bob got blown up in Iraq. And Bob makes this. This is called tumbling block. It's a nice, big, thick cutting board. And if you look at it too closely, you'll get dizzy and fall over. But that's one of my favorites. And Jesse Rufiange, who's a Canadian vet that lives here in Nova Scotia. And Jesse was injured in Afghanistan when an American A-10 is a friendly fire incident, fired on a group of Canadians mistakenly. So these are for your cell phone. You can either set it this way if you're watching your YouTube videos, or you can set it that way. And as simple as they are, they're really well done. All finished off the hand plane, very precise. Does very good work, extremely good work. And is there anybody else I'm forgetting?
No, that's it.
No, Danny's working on getting some stuff. Okay, back to questions.
Bob Abbott was in Afghanistan, not Iraq.
What? Are you sure? Did Bob just say that?
Yes.
You mean all this time I've been saying...
Is Bob sure?
All this time I've been saying Iraq? I swear Bob was in Afghanistan, in Iraq, but he was in Afghanistan. Well, I stand corrected. Sorry, Bobbert.
Okay, I got a couple questions from the chat. This one comes from Joe Cunningham and David Cohn. Same question. What's your favorite way to cut veneer? A veneer saw or knife? Veneer knife.
Oh, yeah. Probably a veneer saw, although I don't use an actual veneer saw. I use any idea where that is, Jake?
The round-bladed one?
Yeah.
No.
So I have a Japanese dovetail saw from many moons ago, and it has a radiused cutting surface. So instead of being straight here, it was radiused like that. Very, very fine curve. And I always use that for cutting veneer, because if you're trying to cut veneer with a knife like that, it's so easy for it to follow the grain and go wonky on you. Not such a big deal going across the grain. You can make multiple passes and it'll eventually cut. But I prefer to use the saw just because a lot of times the veneer I'm working with, I can't mess it up. So I would choose a veneer saw over a knife. I keep thinking I'm forgetting something.
Well, Sue B said that she's insulted when people refer to things as lazy Susans.
Well, Sue, you would never be called lazy. Still want to go back to that place where we had dinner that time. That was delicious chicken. Sue's down in Florida. Love to come down and visit you too. Whether that'll ever happen again, we don't know. Next, Rick.
Next one comes from Doug Peters, also in the chat. Do you have to use the same species on both sides of the substrate, or can you use different species on both sides?
No, I think as long as you've got a veneer on both sides, it's fine. And that would only make sense if I made a table and you're not going to be seeing the bottom side of the table. Why would you use a really good veneer on the top? So, yeah, you could use either or. A lot of times when you buy manufactured plywood, They always have an odd number of slices of veneer so that you've got the centerpiece and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that side. And if it's a really good veneer, you're going to have that on just one face, and the second face may be either a lesser grade or it may actually be a different veneer. Next.
Next one comes from Robert from Planet 3. Can you fix it? Can you fix it when your veneers get out of line?
Well, hey honey, can you fix it when your veneers get out of line? Can you fix your children when they get out of line? If your glue's not, well, actually, you know what? Oh, good question. That actually is a good question. So if you use yellow glue or white glue, it's sensitive to heat. So you can apply heat to that and actually soften it up, or you can take it off. So if I'm trying,
we weren't able to do that with white.
what I'm trying to think. When did we do that? What happened that we?
I'm trying to remember too.
At some point, we built something and we had to make a change afterward.
I think it was that dovetail. The drawer for the. I think it was the drawer for the standing desk. You wanted to melt the glue so you could take it apart because you had screwed it up.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was.
Well, that's so there's if you're dealing with he's talking about trying to take a joint apart where you've got thick pieces of wood. But if this was veneered on top and I could take a heat gun to that, you're not having to heat, you're not having to go through a lot of wood to get to the glue. So that could quite possibly happen. And if you're careful, you certainly could do it. That's if you're talking about fixing something after the glue's already tacked or started to dry. You could do that. Got to be careful. I don't want to burn it either. Big hello to Luther's on tonight. I know.
Super Dave.
Super Dave is? Oh, Super Dave. The goat. So famous.
Super goat.
So, just tell you who these boys are. If you look up here, way up here, you'll see two faces that only a mother could love. In the slender one in the blue would be the goat, also known as David Benson. 17 years, 18 years?
4.
4? Dave spent half his time in the Navy and then switched over to the Army. And Dave got blown up in Afghanistan. And Luther, in the maroon, they look like twins. Luther is a retired U.S. Army colonel, full colonel, as is his wife Erica, is a retired full colonel. He lives part-time in Washington, in a place called Roy. And the rest of the time, he's down Southern California. So, Luther takes care of first?
Yeah, the first.
Yeah, Luther takes care of the first 3 classes. April, May, June, he comes and is the assistant. And then Super Dave comes in and he takes care of August, September, October classes. So they do all their work on tracking and keeping the guys in line so that we can get them here. And it's a big job.
Super Dave said, "Wow, are those supermodels?"
Supermodels? Goat models. Dave lives in upstate New York. He actually is a goat farmer. He has goats, he has chickens, he has a tractor. Next, Rick. Oh, wait, Ken, I think, is Ken on tonight?
I don't see him.
Ken was going to be on. He had an appointment, or else he's normally here. Chris Davenport's normally here. Moose is here with us tonight. And Moose donates, he is the creator of the Dead Cat sweater that we give away every night. And if you remember a few months ago when we had the little happy sweaters and also the golf shirts with the Purple Heart logo. So if you don't win one tonight and you want one really bad, you can go to patssecretgarden.com. Frick will put a link in there and show Moose some love and he'll love you right back. He'll have it in the mail for you Monday morning. How's your inventory?
Good, I got more coming.
Good. And I always say this, I always take a second to talk about the Dead Cat sweater. It's the most amazing garment in terms of light and keeping you warm. I figure it's good up until about minus 15 Celsius with just that on. It's amazing. And yet it's light enough that you can wear it on a summer night around the bonfire and not sweat to death. Pretty amazing product. Next, Frick. And of course, we have Frick here behind the green globe, and Jake behind the camera, and Megrin and Little Moose are running around here somewhere.
All right, next question comes from Jeff Hassey in the chat. He says, when I resaw lumber to make veneer, my bandsaw leaves a rough face. Is there a good way to smooth it before gluing?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would not want to have that as my glue surface. So that came off the bandsaw, and depending on how good of a job, how well your bandsaw is tracking. So what happens is you've got your fence on your bandsaw, and you run your piece, and the blade on the bandsaw does not always cut parallel to the fence. So if the blade is wanting to cut a little bit to the left and you're pushing this board through it, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a real rough surface on the left side and not so rough on the other side. So what you need to do, and what I used to do, if I didn't have such a sore arm, I'd show you. Take a piece of wood and draw a line right down the middle. and have it the thickness of whatever it is you're going to cut, the width. And then go over to your bandsaw and start cutting it. And as you're cutting it, you're going to find you're going to have to slide one way or the other to get it tracking, meaning cutting right on the line. And you get about halfway through, then just leave it there. Then you'll come in and you will put your fence parallel to that piece of wood. Now, oh shoot, I just broke that. Now when you run your board through there, your blade is going to be running true to your fence, so it should feel as smooth on one side of the cut as it does on the other. But even when it is, you know, that's not smooth enough to glue to, I wouldn't think.
You should always have one gluable side, and then
yeah.
you should
Or what
finish
you can do, depending on what you're doing, you can actually joint that face and run that face next to your fence, and then the piece that comes off, go joint it or run it through the thickness planer. So now you've got another smooth face again, and then make another slice. Now you're going to chew up a little more material, but you'll always have one good face that you can actually do the gluing to, and then once it's glued up, you can go in and you clean that up with your plane. So you want good solid contact. All the rules that you take into account when you're gluing two pieces of wood together, same thing. Veneer is wood. It's just thin wood. Did anybody ever come up with a number on where veneer stops being veneer? No?
I think someone did say it in the chat at the beginning, but I didn't catch it.
Okay, next, Frick.
Okay. Next one comes from Peter in the United States.
Hey, Peter.
He says, I've heard paperback veneers are terrible and should be avoided at all costs. What is the thinnest veneers you consider acceptable?
Well, I can't give you a number on that, but I know you buy some of the foreign veneer now. It comes in and it is so thin that they have to color the back of the substrate in order to keep it from showing right through. So, do I have where's all my? Since we moved over here, I don't know where everything is.
What are you looking for?
But those small pieces of veneer that we had, all the really pretty stuff. Same thing that we got for the bloke box.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would, in terms of thickness, the thicker the better, because you can actually work with it. You get so thin that it falls apart. I can't make a comment on the paperback stuff, but I assume that the reason they do that is to keep it together, and so they can make it really thin. And I would assume that you'd be able to glue it, but I don't know that. I guess as I said, I would rather stick with some relatively thick. That stuff, do I still have a piece of it?
What?
That veneer, that mahogany veneer? This is commercially obtained veneer, and I think that stuff is
A 16th?
Yeah, that's a 16th. That would be considered a thick veneer. That's a nice working veneer. You can carry it without it splitting and cutting on you, so 1/16 of an inch would be nice. Half of that would probably be workable, but then you get less than that and you just get into a situation where the ends are going to start splitting on you when you're just maneuvering it, or you're trying to cut it. It's difficult. Next, Rick.
Next one comes from Mikkel Miller in the chat. He says, what is the best way to store veneer, small to large?
Probably not the way I do. I don't know if there's any really good way. I suppose under the weight, it would make sense that if it's burl, you would want to keep it under some weight so that it stayed flat and it didn't end up curling on you when you tried to use it. Then you got to go through that process of trying to flatten it out. That stuff up there is all thick enough that it's pretty much okay. Now, some of it I had to do that flattening out before we used it. I had some fiddleback ash, and that got a little bit ripply. And like I said, the danger with using it like that is you go to put the clamping pressure on it, and it'll split. So you have to make it pliable first by applying some moisture to it. Well, here's some right here. Let me dig this out. Here's a piece. This is a good object lesson. If I can get at it.
Do we need Fritz?
Huh?
Do we need to bring Fritz over?
Fritz? No. I need a housekeeper.
Fritz, jump over here for a second.
I got it. So here's some made up panels. Have you got a free hand, Jake?
Yeah.
You take that? I got quite a bit of this stuff here. There's a piece. And then I found all that stuff that I was looking for, by the way. All right, let's go over.
You're saying that veneer is considered anything less than 1/8 of an inch.
Veneer is considered anything less than 1/8 of an inch?
Yeah, or 3
Who
millimeters.
made up that rule, does it say?
I don't know, but a couple people have
Confirmed?
echoed it, yeah.
They did. They said.
The international authority named they. Stand over here, Jake. Okay, let's see what we got.
Can you put Jeff's stuff away? And those.
Yeah. Throw another question at me, Frick, while I'm cleaning up here so we're not boring them.
Danny in Queensland, Australia.
Hey, Danny.
What is your method of sharpening the blade and setting the blade in a Stanley number 12.5 veneer scraper plane?
Well, I wouldn't call it a veneer scraper plane, but you can certainly use it for that purpose. Did we do a video on that? Setting up that plane? A YouTube?
Which is that?
The 112. It's this one right here.
Yeah, it's the same. But
That's actually an easy one to do. Because, okay, well, let me do this and we'll come back to that. So, Frick, bring me back to sharpening that 112. So here's a piece of, I wouldn't call this, no, this is maple. But if you, so this is, you know what I wanted to do is, I wanted to show them, have I got a micrometer here?
Yeah. Over in your...
Is the battery good?
Yeah, we just changed it.
I'm going to measure some of this stuff and we'll see what we got for thickness. Isn't this fun?
Top left.
That would be the one with the L on it. Are you sure?
No, I wasn't sure if it was top.
Huh?
No, it was top right.
Other side. Other left.
Frick's left.
So this is relatively thick veneer. Now what I was going to tell you about that is, so you see you start to get splits in the end like that. And there's just a split that's occurred in it. But I could fix that. You know, that would go back, if I was careful with that, I could put that back together under pressure and that split would disappear. Remember, it's going to be glued down to the substrate. Don't even need to worry about gluing the joint line because it's thin enough that you've got lots of surface area. But what happens is areas like this dry differently. So that ends up getting, you can see it, but that's bumpy. So I would probably mist that down just so that it makes it more pliable and we could safely clamp it without worrying about it coming apart or splitting. So we zero that in. I'm going to use this part. So this is 35 and a half thou. So that is
30 seconds.
about 30 second, right?
A little
60, a
30 seconds.
16th is 62 and a half thou. That's about half of that. So let's do this one first. So here's a piece of this. This was some beautiful. So Dale Nish was my mentor, and Dale loved walnut. So he had a collection of walnut burl and Claro walnut, and everything. And he gave me a lot of it when I left BYU. So there's the piece that we used over on here. And I had a flitch, so I had several pieces. So I was able to go in and I was able to cut. Is that section on there?
Yeah,
Right there?
it looks like
Yeah.
it. Yeah, the V.
So I was able to go in and cut this section out of several pieces and then just glue them on. Now this one measures that's the same, it's 32 thou. So that's about a 32nd. Here's a piece of Brazilian rosewood. And it's gotten all dried out. And it's got several splits in it. I never used it.
Clearly.
And somebody's taped it together. Now I've never seen veneer tape like this. That seems to be, it's all dried out, but that's much heavier veneer. And
Hockey tape.
it seems the same. That would be a 32nd. Here, I don't know where this came from, but I think this is a piece.
You bought that in a wood show.
I did?
Yeah, you bought like 10 sheets.
Oh yeah? I think this is sapele. And it's got what looks like masking tape on the back of it, and that may have been just put on there in order to keep it together. So what you would do is you would glue this face and then peel that off after the fact. So here's a piece. This is already prepared up. So at some point, BYU went somewhere. There was a furniture manufacturer that gave them a whole bunch of stuff. So what they would do when they would go, when you, I'm taking this from memory, when you would go to a veneer mill and they would pull out, everything would be a flitch. So they would pull out a sample of several different ones, and then for some reason they didn't end up going back in. So they just sent them to BYU and for veneers for the students to use, and that's where a lot of that stuff came from. But here's a piece of
Brown oak.
I'm pretty sure this is brown oak, English brown oak, and it has, because it's as thin as it is, and because it's a burl, so it doesn't stay together very well, and this would go all wonky on you. And you can see all the bits of this is a veneer tape. It's really thin, and it's just a lick and stick. And they've used that in various places where there were some voids or areas that were going to become a void. And then it's got a sheet of poplar glued on the back of it, so it's actually a 2-ply. So if you were going to use this, this would just end up being on a panel that would, the backside would be hidden. But as Alan taught me, the big advantage of doing this is that you get a pretty piece of wood and you can stretch it so that you can use a lot of it as opposed to using it in solid form and then you only get one piece out of it. I get looking at stuff like that and then I get all these ideas of what I want to make with it. I better hurry up, might be running out of time. I don't mean tonight. Okay, Frick, now I'm going to go back to the question becomes, if we had glued that, if we had taken that piece of sapele and glued that down, now I'll got to get rid of all that tape. I probably wouldn't take a hand plane to it. There's not enough material there. So you could scrape it. And this would be a good weapon to use. This is the Lee Nelson's version of the 112, which is the big scraper. The original had a thin blade. This has got a really thick blade. And
is that 316? Or is it just 140?
No, this is 140 thou, right? Okay. Same as the other ones. It's thicker.
I didn't know if it was the same thickness as the number 8.
Yeah.
I think it is. 316.
No.
Thinner?
Yeah, it's the same as the number. It's the same as the blade in the 4.5, 5.5. So what I did on this, I changed it. It had that primary bevel was more like about that, but I found it very difficult to work with. So I backed it off like that, which means when you're coming in and you're polishing, and you're going to do the same thing that you do on a regular plane blade, right? You're going to polish a little tertiary bevel, and you're going to use your ruler, your Charlesworth ruler trick, and just polish the back side of that. So once you get that nice and sharp, and one of the reasons why I changed that bevel, remember, it's cutting on this face, it's going this way, it's not going that way, so this really doesn't matter. But if you made this too acute, then you got a weak edge, so you have to have some material back here. But it's a lot easier to do freehand, that bevel being sitting down a little bit lower than if it's up too high like that. It just squeaks and vibrates on you. And then you can actually use it just like that if you want, or you can put it in your vise. I'm trying not to use this arm so I can sleep tonight and play on Monday. Take your now you don't want too aggressive of an edge, so, and then you would just go back and forth until you found just enough of a burr to do the job. Really quite simple. Actually, I think it's easier to work because of how thick that piece is. It's nice and stiff. That sure beats sanding it. And one of the reasons why you don't want to sand veneer, particularly if stuff that has hard summer wood and very soft or fast-growing spring wood, it's going to sand so unevenly. Everybody has seen a piece of oak furniture built by a newbie, and you run your hand over it and it just goes like this because the spring wood has all been hollowed out and the hard summer wood doesn't cut as easily. So using a big wide scraper like this will make it come off much more uniformly.
I was just thinking, when you go to roll that burr,
yeah,
typically you're doing it on a scraper blade, which is saw steel. Is it a lot harder to do it on plane?
No, because you're dealing with such a small edge. Hi, Moosey. You come to see? Come to show everybody how much weight you've gained? Look at those cheeks. Huh? Can you smile? Yes. Can you smile? Yeah. You like wood, don't you? Yeah. Hi, yeah. Steal the show.
Mickey wants to play hide and seek.
With him?
I think the big wants to play with him.
It wouldn't be dangerous. Next, Frick.
Uh,
Have we answered them all?
Actually, we've gotten through quite a bit, more than usual.
Well, I've just been cranking them out.
Wait, no, I think I have one from the chat. Oh yeah, Ernie from New Hampshire.
Hi, Ernie.
Is it okay to use a normal plane on veneer?
Yes, I've planed veneer before, but depending on what it is. If you're dealing with a burl and your plane catches that, if it's a fragile veneer. So I don't think I would plane this walnut burl, but I wouldn't have any problem planing this cherry. That would plane up nicely. This stuff, we ended up having to sand because this mahogany is rode. So you've got a band of wood going that way, and then you got a band going this way, and that way, and this way, and that way, and this way. And they can be opposing so much so that even with your throat closed down and a high angle blade in there, you'll get smooth, and then you'll get a rough surface. So I had to sand that. But you can plane it. I mean, you can set your plane to take a half a thou shaving if you've got it set up properly, and you know how to sharpen. And you got your good Shaptons over here. Such a great system. It'll allow you to do stuff with your planes that people wouldn't have thought possible. Am I allowed to talk about this new saw,
Nope.
Jake? I'm not allowed to tell people about this new saw that we have that's going to come out next week. This one right here.
Looks the same as all your other ones.
Oh no, it's not. Brand new. Ian made that up for me. We just.
Super Dave thinks he's funny.
Oh yeah, what's he saying?
He said Little Moosey has the same amount of hair as Jake.
He needs a haircut on the back with that
Cul-de-sac.
cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac back. Next one.
All right, next one comes from Dan in Middleburg, Virginia. In restoring a piece of
Hi,
furniture,
Dan.
at what point do you abandon repair and replace the entire veneer?
I'm sorry. Say that again, please.
In restoring a piece of furniture, at what point do you abandon repair and replace the entire veneer?
No, I need Jeff to answer this one. Jeff repairs furniture. You know what? I've repaired furniture when I was desperate for money, but wow. There are experts in furniture repair and antique restoration that could answer that so much better. All I would tell you from my perspective is you try to do it to make it look like nobody touched it, make it look as original as possible. So if you can't patch it to the point where people can't see it, then you did it wrong. You got to start over and do something else. But it would have to be an awfully good piece of furniture for me to want to have to tackle that. That's such a high skilled job, repairing and restoring antiques. I mean, I fixed a lot of people's dining room chairs, but that's pretty simple. You carefully take apart the loose joints and clean them up and glue them back together and hopefully reinforce them a little bit better. But when you're actually getting into veneer work and then trying to make it look like it did originally, that's beyond my forte. Next, Rick.
Paul Pinto in the chat.
Hey, Paul.
He says, how do you prevent the edges of the 112 scraper from digging into the veneer?
So if you watch me the way I sharpen a blade, so if you go to 32 seconds to sharp, that's not clickbait, that's how long it takes to sharpen. I always feather my outside corners. So that means that I take that blade, and that's one of the reasons, thanks for saying that, because it reminds me, hey, how come I got an extra blade for that? So by grinding that primary bevel a little more acute, you can go in here and do this. And so after I'm done, I go 3 or 4 seconds just pushing down with this finger, and then I go 3 or 4 seconds just pushing down with that finger. And the idea, up here, the idea is just to ever so lightly feather those outside corners. But you have to, when you install it, you want to be sitting on a nice flat surface. And I wouldn't even consider this bench to be flat enough. I would probably get a piece of MDF, and I would set it down on there and make sure that it's nice and free. Push down in the middle, and then lock it. Now, the way this tool is set up, the pivot point is behind the blade. So as you move this forward, you're actually going to lower that cutting edge. So you can really sneak up on that. And in this case, you back off one and you advance the other in order to be able to do that. And you keep it nice and tight, and you just keep going until it starts to pick up a shaving. And of course, you don't want to set this up on your good piece. So on a scrap, you'll tell whether or not you're pulling wood from here, or in the middle. And ideally, you want to get about 3/4 of the width of this. Remember, you're taking a very light pass, and you've just barely feathered. I never say the word round over. You're just lightly feathering those outside corners so that you can make multiple passes and one blends into the X without being seen. Excuse me while I get a drink here. Next, Rick.
Next question comes from Kent Boys in the chat. He says,
Hey, Kent.
when creating veneer from really hard woods, what do you have to watch out for, i.e. cocobolo, maple burrow?
When you're creating veneer from really hard woods, what do you have to watch out for? Well, what do you have to watch out for? If I was, let's say I wanted to take a slice off of this. So what I would do is
Quit before you start.
Huh?
Quit before you start.
Quit before I start, yes. Yeah. I would take that piece of purple heart and I would make this surface flat. You see there's some snipe marks right there? I get rid of all that. So I make this surface flat. And then I would slice off my piece. Well, that surface is flat now, and even if this cups, it doesn't matter. When I flatten it out against the substrate, I know I've got a nice smooth surface that will give me a good glue joint. Once it's glued to the substrate, then I can easily go in and tackle the other side to get rid of those marks. So that's how I would go about doing it. On cocobolo, I mean, it's obviously going to be harder to cut. Those woods are hard. And
So you should have a brand new blade.
you definitely have to have a new blade. And I would probably go back to what I said earlier, which means I would come over to my table saw, and with a good sharp blade, I would make a pass, flip it over and make another pass. I might even, if I was doing something like this, say this was cocobolo, as if purple heart's not hard enough. So I'd make a pass on the table saw up like this. I'd make a pass on the table saw like this. Third one like this. Fourth one like this. And then I would essentially be stuck with, how wide is that?
10 inches?
I'll tell you in a second. So that's 10 and say 10 and a half. So I could get 3 inches on the table saw from that side and 3 inches from this side. So if we took 6 inches, so I would end up with about 4. I'd have about a 4 1/4, 4 1/2 inch strip down the middle, and I'd come in 3 inches here and 3 inches there, and that's all I would have to cut with the bandsaw. And I would have a much better chance of making that cut with the bandsaw without having that bandsaw blade. I mean, there's nothing worse.
Well, it wouldn't wander because it wouldn't have any resistance at the bottom of the
Well,
top.
sometimes it will. You got to have your bandsaw blade tight. You got to have it crowned so it's sitting on the top of the top wheel, and stars all have to line up, and it's got to be sharp, or else it just, when it starts to go, it hits a hard spot and it starts to go, and that blade will get in there and it'll just almost do a half moon on you. So a really, really hard wood, I would probably use my table saw for as much of the slicing as I could, and then finish it with the bandsaw. What's up, Mick? What you doing? Next, Frick.
Next one comes from Tim in Rhodesia Island.
Hi, Tim. I don't know where Rhodesia Island is. Moose, you got that one Googled? I'm not sure what he's doing.
He says, do you prefer to veneer on top of wood, plywood, or MDF?
We covered this one, but I'll say it again. MDF would be the first answer because it's nice and flat, uniform thickness. And if I'm doing a drawer front and I want the drawer fronts all to be perfectly matched, then I'll use solid wood like this one over here. You know, you want to see the dovetail, so this has to be a piece of walnut, and then walnut veneer top along the face and along the top.
I guess it would depend on the dimension then.
Yeah, and it depends on where it is too. If it's a door panel, I mean, like I said, if you want it to, if it's necessary or essential that it stay perfectly flat, and you've got a big wide panel, this also works on lids for cabinets. Well, here's another example. Look over here. I just noticed this. So I made this long time ago when the earth was green. There's more kinds of animals than you'd ever seen. Can you finish that, Moose? Cats and rats and elephants, as sure as you're born. So I built this cabinet in my second or third year at BYU. And I built it for a TV and VCR. And back then, VCR tapes were like $40 or $50 a piece. So I couldn't imagine that we'd ever have more than a half a dozen of them. So if you look at those slots over there on the side, they used to be little cantilevered shelves for the videotapes. The TV went in here and the VCR went up on here. But anyway, so the way this worked, these panels are covered in dust. When you would pull one, it would pick up the other. So this is made out of fiddleback ash. So these are MDF panels, and I have, let's see if I can, I should be able to pull this out there. Here, let's go over there. There's nothing else over here to show them, I don't think. So how old is this piece?
80.
Say it's 88. What's that?
34.
35 years? It's not that old. So this was this is some beautiful fiddleback ash. So this was an MDF, a half-inch MDF panel, and then I glued on before I put the MDF on. I glued on.
Before
I put the veneer on, I glued on an ash strip here and an ash strip there. This one was wider because, actually, they should have been the same widths. I don't know why they aren't. Because I cut into it for the finger recess. And then you sandwich the veneer on both sides. And obviously the one in the front, they were all book matched. The one in the back had to be the same, had to be veneered as well to keep them flat. And then that was a way of connecting them so that they would all follow. So you can see I just left the raw MDF on there because you weren't going to see it. It fits inside a groove. But so if you want something to stay, and if these didn't stay flat, they wouldn't work. So if you're dealing with a large panel, I think you're best off to use MDF, and I would even say that over any plywood. If there's any danger of moisture, then you probably are going to have to use plywood. But I don't think you would ever get half-inch plywood to sit nice and flat as that has. And that's, like I said, that's been around a long time, and it's still flat. I like that little saw. Next, Frick.
Next one comes from Peter Carson
Hi, Peter.
in Chester, UK.
In Chester, UK. You're up late, brother.
He says,
Actually, it's only 11:30.
if veneering both sides of a panel,
Sorry,
do you need to have the grain running in the
12:30.
same direction on both sides?
Say it again. I was talking.
Yeah, I figured, yeah. If veneering both sides of a panel, do you need to have the grain running in the same direction on both sides?
I don't think so. I think it's more the glue line than it is the wood, but I suppose if I was trying to eliminate all possibilities, remember there's no guarantee, but there's no guarantee of success, but you can eliminate as many variables as possible. So I would have the veneer running in the same direction on both sides of the panel. So that one I just showed you, the grain's running top to bottom, and I would do the same thing on the back side. Next, Rick.
Yep, Marcus, Utter, and
How are our numbers tonight?
not as good as they usually are.
How many people we have?
647.
Isn't that 649 is the
Lot of.
lot of.
641 now. 639, they're dropping.
Hurry up, throw out a question.
Take your shirt off. Marcus Utter in Milton, Ontario.
Hey, Marcus.
How can I deal with holes in burl veneer?
How can you deal with holes in burl veneer? Oh, so that's one of the that is one of the trade-offs when you're dealing with burl. It's quite frequent that you're going to have that. I suspect is probably why when I showed you that piece that had all those pieces of tape all over it that were just kind of random. They were probably holding pieces together that would otherwise end up being a hole. If it's a pinhole, I mean, I'm trying to think of when I did something that had holes in it. How do you come up with what kind of creative way can you fill those holes that won't draw attention to it? I mean, you could use sawdust of the same color and a little bit of cyanacrylate to set it.
Matt says he uses wood, buddy.
You know what? Furniture manufacturers will often use colored wood putty to go in and do that, and I suppose that would work. You got to fix them. So yeah, either wood putty or sawdust and a little bit of glue. I prefer to put the sawdust in and then put a little bit of cyanacrylate into the sawdust so you can kind of dry. It goes really fast. And you don't, but then you get it. The problem with that is you get the cyanacrylate on the surrounding wood, and then it shows up because it doesn't take the finish the same way. That's a bit of a pain. Might even mask it off all the way around so that you're protecting the area. But maybe wood putty. Maybe they know what they're doing, and wood putty is the better answer. Carefully color match. It would probably blend in. I mean, if you see, when you look at a piece of burl veneer, you've got little pin knots and you get all kinds of stuff. So it would be pretty easy to hide a little small hole that had the same shade as the surrounding wood. So yeah, I would go with that, wood putty. Next, Frick.
You answered the one about the veneer scraper plane. What bandsaw blades do you use for resawing veneers from solid wood?
Well,
That's from Tommy in Oklahoma.
Tommy?
Yeah.
Tommy and OK. What do we use?
Well, I think
I don't like. I hate changing.
There's new ones in the.
I hate changing the blades. So I typically use the same blade that I've got in there. I've had those carbide tipped Resaw King or whatever they call them. Was never impressed with them at all. Would never go out and spend $250 on one. Never felt that they really worked or stayed sharp.
You want it wide.
Huh?
You want it wide.
Yeah. I think you want it wide. It'll track a little bit better. So maybe a 3/4 inch wide blade. You can even go 1 inch. If you want to not have to be changing back and forth, then you go with a half, and you can get a fairly tight radius when you're using it for other things. But it's got to be sharp. I think if you're planning to slice up veneer, I would suggest that it would be worth the time and money to go buy a brand new blade and use it just for that. And Dave Wooland, who used to do a series of classes on bandsaws and setting them up, said that he would always keep one blade just for resawing, and he would never cut a radius with it, because the minute you start to cut a radius, you're going to wear off some of the set on one side, and then you no longer have that nice true straight cut. So
An aggressive cut. Aggressive tooth.
yeah.
Low
you
tooth
get
count.
a height. Yeah, right. So 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 TPI, maybe even 3, so that you get lots of gullet room to clear the sawdust out and to keep it nice and cool, especially if you're dealing. What's his name asked about cutting cocobolo. That would be one of the criteria. That stuff is so sticky, and your blade would heat up really quickly. Sawdust will help take some of the heat away. So a coarse tooth. I've been using Starrett blades, and we've had lots of luck with them. I think they're a good blade. Next, Rick.
Brian Gordy in Warsaw, Kentucky.
Hey, Brian.
He says, how is How possible is it to reach perfection applying veneer without a vacuum press on a small item such as a fancy RobCosman box?
Oh, it's a piece of cake. The secret to doing it is to use lots of cauls. So cauls are just, and you want to use, it's probably best to use MCP, which is melamine covered panel. Just looking to see if I have any.
Right there in the back.
Yeah, here's right here. There's a piece of melamine covered panel. So it's particle board that has melamine on both sides. And the nice thing about that is the glue doesn't stick to it. So sometimes your glue will bleed through your veneer. You don't want to get stuck to MDF. So put a sheet of that on either side. And then the more cauls you have, layers, the more it evenly disperses the pressure from the clamps, and the fewer clamps you have to have. If you want to call it a rule, the clamp typically the pressure from a clamp will go out from the point of contact at about a 45-degree angle. So if you were clamping a thin piece of wood like this, you can imagine if your clamping pressure went out at a 45-degree angle here and here, you'd have to have, your next clamp would have to be here, and you'd have a lot of clamps. But if you put several cauls together, and then you clamped it, and your clamp is here, well, when you draw that 45, now you've got an area that big that's being affected by the clamp. Not as much pressure, but in most cases, people apply way too much pressure. If you're trying to compensate for a board that isn't flat, it's got a dip in it, you're not going to be able to get that with clamping pressure anyway. So that's why I say prepare the face that is going to be glued to your substrate while it's in a big thick form like this, so it's easy to get that nice and flat. Because try getting that snipe out after you've sliced that down to 1/8 of an inch, and that's going to be a heck of a lot harder to do, to get that to lay flat or even to get the cup out of it. Do it first. Next, Rick.
Danny in the chat, he says, how do you go about sharpening a veneer saw?
Well, the one that I had was a Japanese saw. I've never sharpened a Japanese saw before. It has long, multifaceted teeth, and I have...
When you say multifaceted, is it like a crosscut tooth?
Well, I don't even know. It's too small to see. But somewhere in here...
I think it's right there.
Which is not how way I should store my... There it is right there. So that's the saw, that's the file that you use for sharpening that Japanese saw. I haven't even tried. So usually those are so inexpensive that you can almost just chuck them and buy a new one. If you're cross-cutting, you're going to be using a cross-cut saw. If you're ripping, you're going to be using a rip, and that's easy enough to sharpen. Just sharpen like you would any rip saw. But you got to remember too that when you're slicing veneer like that, you're not making a finished cut. You're not going to cut it with a saw and that's going to be good enough for a glue joint. You're going to cut it with a saw cut it with a veneer saw to get it to the appropriate shape, close. And then what I do is I clamp the two edges. So if I was getting ready to glue these two pieces, if I wanted to make these two pieces joined like that, I would take the two of them, like so, and I would get two pieces of probably 1-inch MDF, and I would clamp it so that, let me show you. Here, some right here. I'll just take this one piece. So I'd have these sitting like that. I would have as much as I need to expose. And I would clamp that, and then I would do it I would make a shooting board out of it, and I would take my plane on its edge and I would shoot along there until I had a nice clean edge on both pieces. And then you can simply glue the two together. So I guess what I'm saying is your veneer saw, typically, in the way I use it, your veneer saw is never the final cut. It's not like a dovetail where your first cut is your last cut. You're usually almost going to have to go in and dress those edges to get a really good joint. Next, Rick.
Okay, next one comes from Chris M. in Long Island.
Oh, we didn't say hi to Angie. Chris in Long Island.
Yeah, what is your method for holding down dense hardwood or highly figured veneers when planing them down to 1.5 millimeter or less?
Okay, sorry, you're throwing a lot of information. Read that again, please.
Holding down your veneer while you're planing it down.
Yeah,
Holding down your veneer when you're planing the face of it.
Yeah.
So, first, I'll reiterate what I said, and it's always best to do it when it's in its thick form. But now, if I had to plane this, there's a couple of options that you can do. If it's a small piece, you can make one of these. If it's a tiny piece, this is just a piece of MDF with a piece of sticky back sandpaper. And you take that little piece of veneer, this isn't veneer, and set it on there like that. And the sandpaper will hold it. It's a little bit too heavy of a cut. The sandpaper will hold it so that you can plane it.
Do you think, would that work on that piece?
This,
Yeah.
what I've done on stuff like that is take a piece of that painter's automotive refinishes tape that we use, and I put it in there. Now this is a.
The only problem with that.
You've got to be. You can't be pushing. You can't be planing this way with and it up against something over here because it's going to want to buckle on you. So what you really need to do is you need to have something holding it back here. So if you took a piece of tape, you could even use double-sided tape. I haven't got any in there. So what I used to do, what I was going to tell you was I used to take a piece of tape like this, and I would put it down there in the vise.
The only problem is.
And I'd put that piece of wood on there like that. What's up, boys? And then you could go in there and cut your tape. I had the blade out too far. I wouldn't do it with, I wouldn't try to do this.
Well, the other problem with that.
Wait a minute, let me finish this comment so they won't think I'm dumb. I would have a piece of double-sided tape go right across there like that. Set this down on top of it. Now it's being held there, and then you can go ahead and plane it, no problem. I typically use this idea just with small pieces, and it doesn't break like that. Under normal circumstances, what were you going to say?
Well, we've found that when you do that, it creates a high spot here, and then.
Oh, because you got the tape
Because
underneath
you have
it?
the tape underneath it.
Yeah.
So on thin veneer, that wouldn't work. That
Well,
wouldn't be very.
And then if you want to, you could put a piece of paper, the same thickness, or a piece of cardstock or something underneath it for the rest of it, so that your tape is here, your cardstock is there, so when you put it down, now it's being supported across the entire length. This is Angie. Angie is Ken's cousin. Angie is confined to her bed because of an illness, but she's getting better. And Angie and her sister Lynn, Lynn's her caregiver, they do all of the packaging of our Purple Heart shirts. So when you get one of these Purple Heart shirts, and it'll come all nicely packaged, and Angie's little seal of approval on there. It's awesome. Hi, Ange. Hi, Lynn. And hi, Ken. Team member, has been around for a long time. I haven't been out to see her because of COVID, but we will get back out. Go ahead, Frick.
Larry McDaniel in
Hey.
Newt, Oklahoma.
Hey, Larry.
Is it necessary to have a substantially higher fence to make redrawn veneer on a bandsaw? It seems I have seen people resawing lumber without one.
You had a word missing.
Yeah, Resaw.
Resawn? Did you say redrawn?
It could have been autocorrect.
Resawing.
Read it again so I can.
Oh yeah, it does say redrawn, but
Resawn.
yeah, is it necessary to have a substantially higher fence to make resawn veneer on a bandsaw? It seems I've seen people resawing lumber without one.
Well, yes, you can, but it's really nice if when you're resawing that piece of wood, if you're able to push the piece of wood tight up against the fence and it doesn't move, and then go ahead and push that through. If your fence is only up that high, you don't have that luxury. So I would, and it's nothing to fasten an auxiliary piece of MDF, screw it onto your fence to give you that extra height. So I would do it. If you're going to do any amount of this, there's certain things that you're going to want to go through and do. Did we ever show them this?
Yeah, we did last week.
Did we?
Uh,
It was 2 weeks ago.
maybe we didn't talk about it in depth because
Who was the chap that came up with the
Ooh.
idea?
Jason?
Jason in where Frank Burns is from.
Yeah, in Indiana.
Yeah. Fort Wayne, Indiana. Jason came up with this idea. Jack alerted me to it, and I was so impressed. I said, oh, wow, what a great solution. So Jason's problem was trying to cut dovetails on a real rickety card table. That's what it sounded like. So in being frustrated doing that, he was looking around the shop and saying, well, what's the most solid thing that I have in this shop? And that would be a problem that a lot of people have just because, especially when you're getting started, you're short on equipment. So he saw his table saw. So we took this Moxon Vise from Woodcraft and we were going to start selling it because we were going in and modifying it. And Luther added his 2 bits to it. So what we have, I can't do that. It's made out of maple. So this piece is bolted on. There's 4 holes on the side of my fence and my table saw. And I just used 3 of them. I bored holes in this piece that were big enough to capture that nut, so I didn't have to go and mortise the nut in. But then Luther's idea was to add the springs to it. So when you're winding this back, instead of having to have a third hand to pull this back, it comes with it. And we're adding these little knobs to it, so it just makes it a lot faster to wind it in. But it's a great fixture. A great fixture for a vise. Maybe a little bit low, but it'll get you started until you have time to make yourself a proper bench. Jason, great idea. We did a YouTube on it if you want to see the whole thing. So it was our last YouTube we released. Go ahead, Frick.
Okay, next question is Tim Fradneck in Warren.
Hey Tim, I think I just left Tim I think he just bought something. I called him.
Warren, Michigan, he's from. When veneering a box made from Baltic birch plywood, how do you treat the external corners that reveal the plies?
Okay, you're building a box from Baltic birch plywood. Say that again.
When veneering a box made from Baltic birch plywood, how do you treat the external corners that reveal the plies?
Oh. Well, it's really too fragile to just leave them just to make a butt joint. If I was going to do that, I haven't done it, so if I was going to do that, what would I do? Well, I would probably veneer the pieces first and miter them. I think I would veneer the pieces. Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know if I would. Well, of course, there's going to be an opportunity where you would do that. How are you going to protect your outside corners? You've got very thin veneer, which just doesn't have. You can't cord around it. You can't chamfer it because you'll cut right through the veneer. Now, it would be nice if you could put in. Oh, that's what I would do probably. I would probably take my finished box. If you're finishing the box before you veneer, and I would cut down in the corner. I'll use this as an example. Oh, that kid's rough. 3 years old and he blows through here like he owns the joint. I would take the corner and I would cut out a notch like that, and I would glue in a piece of solid wood. So my piece of solid wood is a little bit bigger, but if you can imagine gluing in a piece like that, and then you go ahead and veneer, and then I don't want a sharp corner, but I could then either cut a chamfer on there or I'd cut a radius. Now, this would have to be the same species as the veneer so that you didn't see any demarcation where once the veneer stopped and the solid wood started. And probably a chamfer would be the best. So you'd have your veneer. Your veneer would be coming along like this. And then when you cut your chamfer, you would see the ends of the veneer, but if it's long grain, well, actually wouldn't it be end grain, but and it would show, but it would be nice and neat. So I would somehow figure out a way to set in. Or the other thing to do would be to veneer after the box is veneered, then come in and cut that corner out and glue in a solid wood. So now you actually see it, you're not hiding it, but what you're doing is making a solid wood corner that will withstand bumps and dings without lifting veneer off.
Okay, Frick, last question, we'll move to the drawer.
So just before we do that, so we have 6 classes. 6 classes this year, and the criteria for coming into the country of Canada right now is April 1st is they're easing it off, meaning you're not going to have a,
Test.
You're not going to have to do a test and all that crap. But you still have to be vaccinated, apparently. So you have to be vaccinated in order to get in the country. I hope that changes, but whatever. So because of that, we have a whole bunch of vets that were accepted to the program but don't qualify because of that. So I know that the applications are open. So you are welcome to go on there and apply. You go to RobCosman.com on the left-hand side, PHP. And in that drop-down menu, you'll see the application. Fill it out. I caution you, your story is most important. We don't know you. And we're not trying to pry, but all we have to go on is what you tell us. So, you have PTSD, you have TBI, you're missing a limb, whatever. If we have a whole bunch of people that all have that same injury, we need to know more than that. We need to know your story, how it's negatively impacted your family life, your personal life. Tell us. Don't exaggerate, but don't hold back. It's just between Jake and I and Super Dave and Luther. We're the ones that make the decision. And don't think your odds of getting in are slim, because they're not. We don't have a ton of applications, believe it or not. And Danny's another one of the vets that I work with. Danny got in on his 3rd time. Mm-hmm. So if we don't keep them, so if you didn't get in this year, you need to reapply the next year. And I don't know from experience, obviously, but in talking to these guys, I know they tell me how tough it is to relive that stuff. And all I can do is apologize, but that's all we have to go by. So you have to tell us your story. And we've heard some real heartbreaking ones, but that's part of the job for us too. But unfortunately, you guys are the ones that have to live through it. So if we can do anything that'll help alleviate some of that. And by the way, Jeff's got a great story about how this experience changed his life. And Kevin Burris has a great story about how it changed his life. Kevin's is actually on our site, so if you go, I don't know how it's not easy to find, but it's on there in the comment section underneath one of the classes. I have to do a little bit of digging to find it. But, and it's not just an experience you have for 6 days, it's a skill you take home with the tools, and it becomes your medicine shop. So, I implore you, or if you know someone who is suffering by themselves, tell them about it so that we can possibly help. And if you want to participate, if you'd like to feel good about this, and I can't put it into words how great it is every time we do one of these classes. If you want to help a soldier, help with the finances of buying plane tickets, tools, whatever, you can donate, and that's where we will use your funds. Last question?
No, we went through them all.
Yep, we did.
We had 5 left, and they were all
Similar ones we already
yeah.
did. That must be a first.
It is, actually.
And we ended on time. Luther will be so proud of me. He's probably writing a
Well,
congratulatory letter right now.
no, don't count your chickens yet. You have 4 minutes, and it usually takes you 5 to wrap up. We have to do the draw. Who's keeping track of the donations?
I don't know.
Are we? What camera are we on?
We're on the main one. He's just going to put it down. Just you can look into that.
Okay, so we don't know how many prizes we're giving away. Who's going to determine that?
I will.
So we give away a prize for every $1,000. Every $1,000 increment of donations, we give away one of these big prizes. One of Kevin's laser engravings on either granite or slate, a shave bowl and brush from Jeff, a tumbling block cutting board from Kevin, from Bob, and as a bonus, we're going to give away this Lazy Jane, and we'll give away 3 Dead Cat sweaters, and you have your option of choosing a Dead Cat sweater or a PHP golf shirt. Is that everything we have to give away today?
Yeah, we're at 1,500.
1,500, so we're only giving away one? Okay, we'll give away one of Kevin's. So Frick, you want to start with the draw?
Yep.
First thing giveaway is the three dead cats.
All
Now
right.
you need to contact us and tell us what size.
Yeah, I
And
have the email on the screen. So
Okay.
if you win an article of clothing, email
Get
support
yourself
at
a
RobCosman.com.
RC woodworking hat. Keep your head warm. Keep the sun out of your eyes.
All right, first winner
Close
is.
it tight, Mick.
What's this for?
This is for dead cat.
Dead Cat's going to Chris Barber in Pennsylvania.
Chris in Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Chris. Next one.
Next one is
Close that door too, Mick.
going to Larry Gamrat in Wells, Minnesota.
Larry in Wells, Minnesota. Congratulations. You'll need it up there. It's probably still snowing.
Another one.
Yep.
This one's going to Brad Finney in California.
Brad in California. Congratulations. Remember, it's never too hot for a dead cat. This is for the I'm going to say electrolysis. This is for the electrifying Lazy Jane.
And it is going to Chuck Nees in Indiana.
Chuck in Indiana. Congratulations. And our final one is going to be, so you get to pick. So Kevin, if you go on to Kevin's site, if you win, Burris, B-U-R-A-S Woodworking, and find the granite and the granite or the slate, and there's several different ones that he has to choose from: Canadian flag, American flag, and different scenes that are on there as well. So who's the big prize winner?
Big prize winner is
And we're ending right at 9.
Bill Farrell in Norfolk, UK.
Oh, hey, Bill, over in. Well, you know what? Now, Kevin, you contact Kevin, and I bet he would do your flag with something that is unique to the Brits. I'll let you contact Kevin. You can contact him through his website, or if you need to, you can do it through us. Okay, over and done.
Yep.
Thanks to everyone that helps. A lot of people in the background. My daughter Erica and my wife Kim and Megan put on a wonderful meal for us every night before we do this. Tonight we had lasagna. Moose was there to join us. And Frick over there behind the big green globe. That's all we see. Keeps everything. There's no technical glitches tonight.
My microphone was off for part of it.
Well, I just made it nice and quiet. Jake behind the camera with that heavy thing that he has to hold for 2 hours. Moose here holding that chair in place. It never moved. Ken answering questions online. Super Dave keeping us all entertained. Luther keeping all the loose ends tied up. Angie at home getting ready to pack up t-shirts. Cheers to you folks. See you in a couple of weeks.